appraised desire at market value. The first lesson an auction house teaches you is that value is a story with a hammer at the end. My name is Miles. I work in cataloging at Harrow and Vale, the kind of auction house that packages provenance like perfume and sells the idea that time can be owned. The man I loved was Ben, an urban planner who measured streets the way some men measure loyalty. We rented a one-bedroom over a cobbler whose window displayed shoes like confessions. On our fridge we kept 3 rules on a yellowing sticky note. Be home when you say. Don't rehearse leaving. Kiss before sleep. We didn't write anything about collectors who flirt with scarcity, auctioneers who sell gravity by the lot, or the way velvet ropes make adults speak softly and lie with style. The spring sale was called Icons and Errors, which is how we forgive the 20th century. I was responsible for the second part, objects whose flaws had become their biographies, misprinted album covers, prototype watches with dials that blushed wrong, a Calder mobile that hung a little drunk. Our star lot was a painting with a crack like a coastline and a title that promised the sky. It came with a letter, a photograph of 2 men pretending not to touch, and the kind of rumor collectors think they're immune to. The auctioneer for the sale was Julian Vale himself, co-owner Velvet Voice, a reputation for saying fair warning like he could make time repent. He walked through cataloging the day the painting arrived and said, without looking at me, "Make it sing with its scar." I said, "Cracks improve pitch." And he finally turned, smiled, and took my name like a receipt. Ben came by that night with takeout in a paper bag that perspired with ambition. He kissed my jaw and asked, "How much is the sky worth this week?" I told him what we'd put as the estimate and he whistled low. "You could build a bus lane out of that," he said. He meant it as a joke and a prayer. We ate on the floor because our table had decided to be a bookshelf. He slid a foot under my thigh like a claim and asked whether Julian's suits were as sincere as the catalogs. I said yes without trying to sound interested. He didn't call me on it. Urban planners are patient with streets and with men who haven't decided whether they're bored. Julian and I orbited each other professionally, which is the pretense that lets gravity stay handsome. He has the practiced ease of men who know which glass to take from a tray without looking. When he steps into the sale room, the lighting learns its job. When he stands over a lot, bidders straighten their spines like volunteers. I watched from the wings with my clipboard and my catalog, calling condition notes into my headset like prayers to a god with pockets. He watched everything, the room, the phones, the screens, me. He'd lean over the rostrum between lots and ask a question he already knew the answer to in a voice that brushed the back of my neck. "The horological error, Miles. 1972, wrong hand set right." I'd nod and he'd say to the room, "A failure that learned to keep better time," and paddles would lift like confessions. He asked me to stay for a late-night condition check 2 days before the sale. "For the painting," he said. "I don't trust its angle." We stood in the photo studio with the softboxes still pretending to be moons. I moved the easel an inch. He watched like the inch mattered to his biography. "You smell like paper and electricity," he said, and I said, "You smell like varnish and a theory." And then he did what dangerous men do when they've run out of ways to be charming. He closed the space. The first kiss tasted like patience. He put one hand at the base of my skull and waited for my mouth to decide whether it believed him. I answered with a noise I didn't know I had permission to make. The painting watched us with its crack like a raised eyebrow. We stopped because his phone sang the sound that means a donor has remembered he is rich, and because somewhere a camera believed in its own battery. I told Ben because lies make sleep smell like airports. He listened with his chin lifted the way he looks at a street grid he can't fix. "Do you want him?" he asked, steady as weather. "I want the room he stands in," I said. He nodded like a man who's learned the difference between impulse and plan. "Then don't bring the room home," he said, and kissed the corner of my mouth with the kind of kindness that makes people spend money at meetings. Julian began sending me late-night messages that read like catalog notes written for the body. "Tomorrow, Lot 32's label, don't let it apologize. You looked past me today. I haven't earned that verb. Cracks improve pitch." He'd appear next to me in the storeroom like an idea that had decided to be flesh. He'd stand too close behind me while I examined a backboard, exhale laughter into my collar, and the world would tilt just enough to make physics look complicit. We did not sleep together, not then. The withholding became its own sport. We stood in the narrow corridor behind the sale room one afternoon, shoulders almost touching, listening to the senior specialist practice his talking points for a bidder with a family office and a hunger. Julian leaned toward my ear and said, "Do you know the difference between scarcity and theater?" I said, "Hammer price." And he grinned and said, "You're dangerous, Miles," in the tone men use when they want you to believe you already are. The intrigue scaled up with the consignor. The painting belonged to the estate of a composer whose love letters made good press. The executor was his nephew, Daniel, a man in a navy suit and grief that had learned to be efficient. He brought a binder of provenance and a smile that didn't survive photographs. He asked about the reserve in a voice that expected to be disappointed. I pointed at the language in the contract that made disappointment sound like caution. He asked about Julian's confidence in the lot and smoothed his tie as if the answer might wrinkle him. I watched his gaze find Julian across the room and settle into admiration. People fall in love with auctioneers because auctioneers make decisions in public and look good doing it. Daniel wasn't in love. He was building a narrative that would let him call a number without vomiting. Ben and I kept normal on purpose. It's our favorite genre. He went to community board meetings where people performed Future on folding chairs. He came home smelling like cheap coffee and Covenant. I went to viewings where people tried to flirt with sculpture. I came home smelling like lemon oil and discretion. At night, he put his hand on my throat very gently like a man reminding a road not to speed and asked, "Here?" with a smirk, and I said yes, in a voice the auction house never hears. We slept like brothers of mercy, until my phone learned Julian's schedule. The night before the sale, Julian texted, "Come see the room breathe." I went because some invitations are nouns. The sale room without people sounds like a rumor clearing its throat. He stood on the rostrum with his hands in his pockets and said, "This is where we decide what the city believes about itself." He descended the steps and stopped one rung above me until our faces were the same height. "Do you want to be good at this?" he asked softly, "or do you want to be a saint?" I said, "I want to keep my job." He kissed me with a control that felt like kindness until it didn't. We broke apart because the door opened. Security doing their rounds speak in shoe soles. Julian said, "I'll make the room deserve you," and left with the arrogance that makes investors forgive weather. I didn't confess that kiss. Cowardice, that thrifty bastard, counted the hours till the sale and decided Ben could have them unspoiled. The sale began with watches, their tick a chorus under the numbers. I rattled off condition notes into my headset while Julian sold time with sentences that made steel blush. The painting came halfway through, the room already buzzing in the way rich people think is private. Phones lifted. The internet did its thin applause. Daniel stood near the aisle and held his breath with a look that asked the dead for professionalism. Julian opened the lot at a number that made the room respect itself. Bidding climbed like a polite riot. I watched Daniel's hand rise as if someone else were piloting it. At a number I had only seen on paper, the pace slowed. Julian did his favorite trick. He turned the silence into a room and invited everyone to live there. "A masterpiece that chose honesty over repair," he said. "A life with its fault line honored." A paddle on the far phone bank lifted. Daniel lifted again, eyes closed like faith. Julian's gavel hovered. "Fair warning," he said, and then looked at me, not at the number, and I felt the compliment like a fever. The hammer fell. The room exhaled. Backstage, Daniel cried the way men do when money makes grief practical. He shook my hand and said, "He made it sound like my uncle never lied." I said, "That's the premium," and hated how true it felt. Julian came up and put a hand on Daniel's shoulder and squeezed like a benediction. Daniel looked at him like a lighthouse. Julian looked at me over Daniel's head and smiled like complicity. I wanted to be worth it, and I wanted to vomit. We celebrated in the office with paper cups and a bottle that had been waiting to be morally justified. The staff drifted home, high on adrenaline and relief. Julian closed the door to his office and leaned against it. "Now," he said. It wasn't a command. It was the end of a hypothesis. I walked toward him because the part of me that likes hammer prices wanted the gavel twice. The kiss was unprofessional, and then it was private. He lifted me onto the desk like a catalog he intended to annotate. I put my fingers at his belt and found the place where power forgets its script. He murmured something that tasted like apology and opportunity. We didn't undress completely. It was worse. It was rehearsal and opening night at once, our bodies writing provenance in pencil, handled, cherished, regretted. I went home before dawn, raw with success and malpractice. The city smelled like bread and an early trash truck sermon. Ben was awake on the couch, the TV muttering disaster footage to people who wanted to be updated and soothed. He turned it off and looked at me with the calm that makes men confess. I told him everything like a condition report: date, door, extent of damage, notes for the conservator. He listened. He did not flinch. "Do you want him?" he asked again, and I thought about value and scarcity and theater, and I said, "No, I want what he made me feel about the room." Ben stood, stepped into me, and placed his hand flat on my chest like he was reviewing the plan for a boulevard. "This is your room," he said quietly. "I won't bid against ghosts." He kissed me, and then, with an efficiency I love and fear, he went to take a shower and left me with the morning. I resigned the next week in the way people resign when they aren't sure if the room was worth the body. Harrow and Vale doesn't love drama unless it raises estimates. They accepted my letter with a handshake and a promise to call during chaos. Julian's reply was a single text: "You don't have to leave to be honorable." I wrote back, "I'm leaving to be boring." He sent a heart and a period, which is either sarcasm or grace. Daniel asked me to lunch at a cafe that pretends croissants are still news. He wanted to talk about conservation. He wanted to ask if the letter with the photograph should go to an archive or a drawer. He wanted to tell me the buyer had sent a note that felt like forgiveness. "You did right by him," he said, meaning Julian. I said, "He did right by your uncle," and we pretended that sentence completed itself. When the bill came, he reached for it and I let him. The estate owed me nothing but a story, and I'd already spent it. Ben and I wrote a fourth rule on the sticky note: don't price feeling at market value. It looks trite until you live it. We learned to be small in rooms that sell adjectives. He brought home maps that needed margins. I brought home free postcards from museums we couldn't afford to donate to. At night, he still put his hand on my throat like a seat belt and asked, "Here?" And I said yes, and the apartment decided to be enough. Sometimes I pass the auction house and catch my reflection in its glass. A man who speaks both aesthetics and arithmetic and has chosen to retire early from applause. I think of Julian up there selling certainty to people who know better and do it anyway. I think of the painting on a different wall. It's cracked like a private coastline. The new owner arranging light so the scar tells the richest story. I think of Daniel learning to be generous without needing to watch it happen. I think of Ben at a community meeting, drawing lines that ask cars to be humble. If someone asks what the sale meant, I don't say prices or records or the day my mouth learned a verb it had to give back. I say it was about the difference between scarcity and theater, and the way a man can mistake desire for provenance if the room applauds at the right time. We appraised desire at market value and then decided to keep what we couldn't sell. We were home when we said we would be. We kissed before sleep. And when a voice somewhere still says, "Fair warning," I turn toward the only hammer I trust, Ben's palm on my chest, the gavel that closes the lot and opens the room we already own.